The second scripture reading continues in the 13th chapter of the Gospel according to Mark, picking up with the 24th verse through the 37th. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. And the stars will be falling from heaven and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch became tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at night, or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. The story goes like this. When I lived in Indianapolis, somebody told me of this, and being someone who is strangely interested in architecture and design and has come to a place of thinking about the conversations we have about God and what we believe and how God is revealed, this insight that was offered, this reflection that somebody gave, got the wheels turning in my head. A dangerous thing, mind you. The story goes like this. After World War II, the Houses of Parliament being bombed and in need of rebuilding, the members of Parliament got together and they were trying to decide what shape the chamber should take. It was an opportunity, mind you, to do something different. It was an opportunity to have a conversation around what do they believe? What do we believe? What is important as an institution? What are our guiding principles? What are the things that are foundational and core? And what are the things that have been built up over time, accruing? They talked about building a shape and a structure, a space, much like what we have here in the United States. They looked at Congress in D.C., and there were several members of Parliament who said, that's the direction we should go in. That is the shape of the space we should make. And Churchill, it is said, got up and rebuked them and said, that is not who we are. And so they rebuilt functionally what was. Some of the pieces are there for show now. The books on the table aren't really always books. And the line on the floor that you had to toe, lest you impale someone on the other side. People don't carry swords in Parliament anymore. The line is not as important. But the way of being, what made the Houses of Parliament the Houses of Parliament, needed to be reflected in the space. That's how the story goes. Theology, philosophy, what we believe about who we are and what we are called to be about and doing, those things influence the spaces we design. Yes, there is a heavy note of practicality to all of it, but ultimately, the spaces should be reflective of a belief. Even if the belief is just, I need it to function a certain way. I need it to be clean and dry, dark at night, and well lit during the day. These theologies and philosophies of space lead us to build structures, to create literal buildings as a manifested theology, but to also create structures of institution. And then those buildings, those structures of institution, go on to shape our theology. There's a church here in the Hampton Roads area that went through a massive building project. And they thought about, what do we want to do? What do we want to be? How are we doing things? What do we believe? Who are we already? One of the things they did is they had a ministry that they were incredibly involved in. And so when they built the new building, they made sure that what was needed for that ministry was part of the building, was reflected in the building. And now, a handful of years later, when you go and talk to people who are connected with that congregation, they will tell you that that was one of the best moves they made. The building was shaped by a theology, a belief, a mission, a ministry. Other parts of the building, not so much. We do it because the other people are doing it. We do it because it's what's expected. And what is found is those parts of the building don't seem to have the same guidance, inspiration to them. Because institutions, once they are built, they do shape. They're designed to perpetuate. That's why we have them in a lot of ways. We have schools as institutions to perpetuate, to teach. They begin, at least in Protestant industrializing Europe, as a way for shaping a working class society. They frame. I'm a product of these things. I'm a product of institutions and institutionalism. There's a joke in there somewhere. I've benefited from the things that are perpetuated. The inspiration of buildings and shape and the thoughtfulness and the prayerfulness that went into them. I am an agent of these things. And I am finding that institutions, institutionalization, institutionalism, it's rigid. It can be limited or limiting. A lot of times the things we build lack flexibility and vulnerability. At some point, we as human beings, the creators of institutions, the builders of buildings, we create things that in some ways eventually become primarily self-perpetuating. It is the sad story of the church that has to open its doors every Sunday so that it can raise enough money so that it can go through the week and open the doors the next Sunday. The story here in Mark is structured as well. Mark is sharing the good news. He says as much at the very beginning of the gospel. Structure, It helps us tell the story. It creates a space that we can live into. The gospel is building something, and it's based on a theology, a good news that is grounded in a early first century event that Mark is now telling with words and images and symbols and the realities of community some 50 years later. Imagine that, the changes that come over that 50-year period of time. I mean, how might a theology of cross and tomb that shape in the institutions of faith and the creation of the Gospels, how might that change over 50 years? 500 years? 2,000 years? And what if the institutions that are created around that don't change? We're in a space now, literally and figuratively. It's a space that is solid. We have walls and roofs and a floor. And it has form and structure, guiding documents, cultural ways of being. It's a space that is rigid. It perpetuates. It is reassuring in its solidity, its manifestation of belief. And it is a space that is being flexed right now. It's being pressed and even transformed. There was some research done on why the Forbidden City in Beijing is still standing. This is an area that gets some pretty impressive earthquakes over time. How is it that the buildings are still up? The answer they found on a massive quake table was flexibility. The ability to kind of wiggle and jiggle when the earth moves under our feet. Yes, this is a story in Mark of rigidity and flexibility. With our diaspora worship, our diaspora church being scattered in this point, with our anxieties and the opportunities that we are experiencing in this earth-shaking event, we are seeing flexibility and the cracks that come from an inflexibility. The cracks are vulnerabilities. The church needs to be vulnerable in order to share the good news. It needs to be flexible, especially in light of the language we hear in Mark, apocalyptic language, the end of things, whenever and however that may be. Apocalyptic might seem a too strong a term to throw out at this point, but we're in a place where the structure in the church is not the structure of the church. It's a time of transformation. Every day is actually a time of transformation. And here in Mark, as he's picking up the story of Jesus the Christ walking with disciples, leaving the temple grounds and going out, this is a place of apocalyptic change. Not apocalypse in the sense of fire and brimstone and weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's not the destruction of the world necessarily. Mark doesn't go into detail on destruction of things. He is talking about the ending of institutionalism. It's crucified. It's nailed to the cross. The rigidity of the ways of being that have existed are losing their theological grounding. The story is when the Copernican model of the solar system came into being, when the sun was moved to the middle of everything instead of the earth, that there was a paradigm shift in science. Galileo and his crew. But those who wanted to hang on kept trying to find ways to describe why the planets move across the sky in an uneven pattern, trying to rationalize the institution that had existed, the ways of being, the rigidity of things did not allow for the possibility of humans being wrong, and it didn't allow for the flexibility that God will reveal new things, things that will completely upend our world. So they come up with this fancy scientific way of understanding things called retrograde motion, circles upon circles upon circles. The tap dancing we do to maintain the way things are. But Jesus proclaims that the temple stones won't last. By the time Mark is writing, or shortly after his gospel is penned, the temple will indeed be destroyed. This is apocalyptic in the sense that it is an undoing, an earth-shattering undoing of institutions that have supported and grounded and perpetuated, shaped, benefited, and regimented the people. It is the end of ministries that have had their season to the glory of God. And so we're brought back to the fig tree. The fig tree that, when the stones are cast down and the utterly inflexible are worn down to dust, the fig tree will remain. Earlier in the Gospel of Mark, the fig tree is chastised for not bearing fruit out of season. Now in this vision, this post-apocalyptic movement, this institutionalism crucified moment of cross and tomb, for Mark is telling the tale after the resurrection, that fig tree is an emblem of God's new growth. The theologies are shaped by the perpetuation of institutions. Those theologies give way, not disappearing, mind you, but transformed, redeemed, perhaps in some cases, or indeed ground to dust for their lack of flexibility. They give way to the realm of God that is evident in us all, the realm that shapes and forms. We're given a glimpse of the opportunities that we might perceive in this moment and in this time. May we be of open minds, open hearts. May we be alert, so that we can be part of all that God is doing in our own special ways. So that we might be church in this day, in this moment. Not the church that existed 50 or 500 or 2,000 years ago, but the good news now, fruiting, putting forth leaf, growing, in ways that we have been and in ways that we have never been before. Thanks be to God, and amen.